Hey, what's up, guys? So we're back here with Jon, the president of Radenso, and we're going to be basically talking about Radenso as a company. One thing that I really liked is you're really open about what it's like actually running a radar detector company on the forums and online, which is awesome because, as you know, a customer or somebody just reviewing them and using them, we don't really get to see any of this stuff.
Totally.
I don't get to see it. So I'd love to just learn more about the experience of what it's like on the other side of running all these. So tell us a little bit about Radenso and what it's like running a company and manufacturing products.
So one of the reasons that I try to be fairly open about what it's like running a company is because I didn't always run a company. You know, with radar detectors specifically, I was a user on RD Forum and a customer before I got into the industry. So the perspective that I had that was formed as my experience as a customer, it actually really does impact a lot of the way that we approach things today. But I also have the privilege of, now that I am in the industry, of seeing things from the other side as well. So there are always certain instances, I think it's funny, where maybe I'll read something online where a customer will say something for me, and you realize that a customer can only make a decision based on the information that they have. Companies can't always share everything, but the customer still has to make a decision. So it's interesting how I can kind of see why customers think what they think, even if maybe it doesn't necessarily jive with the company's reasoning for doing certain things.
So maybe I guess just to get started, can you talk about some of the things that have been maybe the biggest surprises for you or things that we wouldn't necessarily expect or know about?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the number one biggest surprise for me, speaking from like a financial perspective of having to raise capital and having to, finance operations, the biggest surprise for me was that it's extremely rare to find anybody, a venture capitalist, an angel investor, or wherever your capital may come from, to find somebody that believes that product should come first, the quality of the product should come first,
Really?
The feature set. Yes, and I think that's actually by and large a byproduct of how e-commerce has changed society, really, or how, more specifically, the internet has changed society. I think you're a perfect example of it, actually, because if you go back 20 years or 30 years, which is when a lot of successful venture capitalists made their money, right? It takes time to make money, then it takes time to invest it. So people who have money now to invest oftentimes made it 15 years ago, right? And a lot's changed. Nowadays we have things like YouTube influencers who do reviews. You educate people. This is how a product works. This is how, what you shouldn't buy. This is what you should buy.
Yeah, how does this work? And,
It used to be, take out a couple ads in Car and Driver and say your product's the best even if it's not, and you'll sell a bunch of them. That's not how I grew up consuming products. I grew up consuming products, researching them, and if something was bad, I would leave a bad review.
So as far as venture capitalists, what do they look for now if they're not looking at the products?
Well, and I don't mean to paint with a broad brush. Like, there certainly are investors. Obviously, I've been successful raising capital in having the ability to spend it on product now. But you hear a lot of no's just based on, well, you shouldn't spend on R&D, you should spend more on marketing.
Really?
It's mostly marketing, Salesforce, send out snail mailers, an ad in Car and Driver is expensive. But that's what a lot of the pressure is to do. A lot of people treat products as widgets, where they don't necessarily care what you're selling.
Yeah.
But that didn't jive with me because I was an enthusiast of the product before I went there.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to accept money from somebody who just wanted to treat it like a widget, so to speak.
So if you're then like designing something like this and you're focused on the product, so what does it take to make this? How do you design it? How do you create it? Like, what does it take to make this?
Yeah. So just to be clear, because I don't want to confuse people, our engineering was not in-house when this was produced, but the concepts that I'll speak to apply the exact same, whether it's produced in South Korea like that is, or whether the engineering sourced here like our newer stuff is. It takes an incredible amount. Long story short, that could be a 45-minute video in and of itself. But if you look at a detector, right, the process from going to an idea, to a concept, to a prototype, to raising money to develop the prototype farther, proving product market fit, mechanical design, electrical design. Think of it like a giant puzzle that has a million pieces spread, not just on a table, but over in California and Connecticut, and somebody has to be able to take all those pieces, come up with a plan, and then execute on that plan to make the whole puzzle. And one thing I like about product development is that it is a challenge. I've made a ton of mistakes doing it, and sometimes what could be a small mistake, just choosing one vendor, can tank a whole project.
Wow.
So you have to really be careful every step along the way and be mindful of learning from your past failures, and just keep improving, kind of. It's a very iterative process.
Yeah. So I guess like when you're developing it, are there any things that are, we talk about the challenges, are there some that you're able to overcome, some that you have to work on for a while, some that you can't? Like, what is that like?
Yeah. So it's interesting because, I went through the no photo development process before I was in Radar.
Yeah. You posted the prototypes and everything. That was cool to see.
And I learned a lot from that. I think the most important lesson that I learned, even though the no photo didn't turn out 100% the way I liked it to, we were a very small company back then, and we were resource limited in a lot of ways, but the technology turned out, it worked fundamentally. And what I learned from that was that there's going to be a lot of people that tell you that something's not possible, and frankly, they're always usually wrong. There were numerous times along the no photo development when we came to a dead end engineering-wise, and the engineer said, "I'm sorry, this is just not possible." One example of that was picking up the flash more than 15 feet away in direct sunlight.
Okay.
Because as you know, the no photo used infrared photodiodes, and the sun emits a ton of infrared. So the signal to noise ratio just gets too bad. And they said, "That's it, it's the end of the project, we should shut it down."
Wow.
And it took like a month and a half of me just driving down there. We contract engineered that project locally. So I drive down there every single day, work with them, and just try to think of out-of-the-box ways. And eventually we figured it out. And that was a learning moment that I've seen that repeat 15 times over the course of really the whole history of No Limits or Radenso as a company. And in every area, from product development to resource allocation, there's always a way.
So what is it like then if you're getting feedback, whether it's your own testing or you see something on the forums or reviews online, and you see something that you want to change? How does that process work to actually execute, implement tests?
So you're talking about like a firmware change or something?
Yeah, like a firmware update. What's involved with all that?
So that really depends on whether or not, what I will say is it varies company to company. Some companies have the ability to do everything in-house, where it's just you walk over to your coworker's desk and say, "I want that change done." And we have that capability with our current products on certain things, but if it's like a hardware change, I don't always have that capability because that particular detector is manufactured in South Korea. So then you have to go through a process of contacting the manufacturer, explaining to them the change that you want. It's usually going to cost you something. You got to price it out. And then determine if it's feasible. But along the way, you might run into a million different things that impact it that you never would have thought. Maybe the hardware has a limitation in memory, like the whole, the Uniden R3 auto lockout thing.
Yeah.
And like I'm pretty sure we're going to have the same limitation in the XP. That's something that you just may not have thought about, or the engineer may not have thought about, that now you have to figure out.
It wasn't designed with that initially, so yeah, that makes sense. Have you come across a lot of that, or most things you're able to work around?
Yeah, and actually, with our current generation products, I think they're a lot better now than they were when I purchased the company, when they first came out. But we do run into hardware limitations fairly often. Now, I want to be clear that, speaking as a consumer, I run into those same hardware limitations on pretty much all current detectors. And that's something that I know that we'll talk a little bit more about later, and once I can start sharing a little bit more about what we're doing. But I've just been really surprised how archaic a lot of these current detectors are.
You've mentioned that, so I know you've compared them to like iPhones and stuff, and how the iPhone is way more powerful than any radar detector. So what's kind of under the hood?
Again, that varies detector to detector, but typically you're going to find a really, really slow ARM processor that executes simple instructions. It usually handles like the user interface, the sounds, the display, and then nowadays, some of the more modern detectors, like the Uniden R3, for example, does use a DSP chip, a dedicated DSP chip, but even those are pretty slow, to be honest with you, when we're dealing with radar. And you got to keep in mind, fundamentally, what we're doing is no different than what the military tries to do. And do you really think that, radar's radar, right? It doesn't matter if you're trying to detect police radar or military radar. The modulation scheme, the amplitude, those are going to be different, but it's radar.
It's radar, yeah.
And do you really think the military is using, a 2-cent ARM processor and a $5 DSP chip? No. And I also don't think they have BSM pulses.
Yeah, that would be nice. So I guess speaking of which, kind of what's your priority as a company? Like, what do you want to focus on? Range, filtering, customer service? Like, what are the things that you're most focused on?
So I think this kind of goes back to the discussion that we started with about we have to focus on the product. From an operational standpoint, a business standpoint, what a lot of my focus has been on over the year is putting processes in place to overcome the inherent limitations that we've had. So we have an idea of the product that we are making that all of us agree on, and we have this vision for. So I've been looking at what would hold us back from doing that, and that's why we've been moving all of our engineering domestically, looking at moving a lot of our manufacturing domestically eventually. That hasn't happened yet. Kind of identifying where are our holdups, and that goes not just from a manufacturing perspective, but like technologically, what's our holdups? How do we solve that? So basically, my job is just putting together that game plan and then making sure that we stay on track for it, and then participating with the engineers.
Is there maybe a couple topics in particular that you're wanting to really focus on in the future?
Yeah, I think performance, and I define that as not just range, but as false alert filtering. I would like to completely eliminate all BSMs, and I believe it's possible.
Really? That would be amazing. That's like the holy grail of filtering.
It will happen. It's just a question of affordability right now, but the hardware is there to do it.
Okay.
Learning as much as we can about our RF environment is my focus right now. And then finally, in terms of look, feel, feature set, I don't think any detector on the market is really that great. There's a lot of companies with their products that I admire, and it doesn't have to always be an electronics product. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but I can think of like a chair that has a beautiful design.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's whatever product it is, a ping pong table, a camera. I like the design of the Sony cameras. I think they're attractive. I don't really think any detector.
It's not the prettiest design ever,
No detector, you pick it up and you're like, wow, you want to show your friends.
This is gorgeous. Like, ooh.
Yeah, like somebody that buys like a 993 Turbo, a Porsche, they buy it because of that design lineage.
Right.
You can see a 993 Turbo in a 991 Turbo. I think that's something that's missing from the current industry.
I would love to see more of that as far as the design, the UI, all that kind of stuff, to really work on that. That would be cool.
Yep.
Yeah. So as far as maybe like owning a company, have you owned one before? Is this new or?
Learning as I go, for sure.
What's it like actually now running a company like this?
So I was lucky enough to grow up in an entrepreneurial family. My father was a very early employee, kind of a co-founder of a medical technology startup. So totally different field, but a lot of the same principles apply when it comes to raising money and building things. But I think the most valuable experience that I learned from that is simply to be stubborn, because his company was sold to Dell fairly successfully, but I got to see that 10-year process of all the times when people were discouraged or people were frustrated.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, you hear no a million times, but the 1,000,001th time that you ask is when you might hear yes. So I think that's the number one thing that I was lucky enough to see, and that I've definitely got a chance to draw on through this. I mean, I love what I do. Not every day is a good day.
That's
right?
life. I mean, that's life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of keeping an even keel and making sure that you just have that strategy, as I talked about, and learning as you go.
That makes sense.
You have to be open to learning as you go. Nobody did anything before they did it, right? I mean, is this your first time being a YouTube influencer?
Actually, yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, you figured out my old videos. If you look at my original ones, they were horrible. But you just kind of learn as you go.
It's that process, of getting to where you need to go based on what you've done.
Figured out how to present the cameras, the editing, all that stuff you learn as you go.
Exactly.
So as far as all this, is there maybe like something you definitely want to share with people that they're not familiar with, or something you'd like to just share in general?
I just think it's important to be true to yourself, but be true to your beliefs, right? I know I've talked a couple times before in person how doing things that seem counterproductive to like business 101 sense has actually proved to make great business sense for us in the long term. A couple of my employees are a perfect example of that. We have pivotal employees that changed our company that probably didn't make sense for me to hire, that were drawn to us because of our enjoyment and belief in radar detectors in cars. So people would say, why would you hire an employee with no background? Because they like radar detectors. And I say, well, because they like radar detectors and they're able to learn.
Yeah,
and those employees have changed the company. So I think kind of just being who you are and being willing to communicate who you are to your customer doesn't just attract customers. Even if it costs you some money to do that, I think in the long term, it'll always pay for itself.
Yeah.
So I guess be who you are and don't give up is kind of my mantra.
That makes sense. Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing and giving us some insight and kind of behind the scenes look at Radenso.
Definitely. Thank you.